If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain how I found out about this. It's free. It's on your app store. There's a creation tool that allows you to record and edit your podcast right now from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Please, I urge you, don't waste another minute. I wasted 3 years. I attended all kinds of events to learn all the steps. I was so confused, and it was right here. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Do it now. Good Saturday, April 24, 2021. I'm Sabah Fakhoury, your host of the Heart and Home podcast. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration and U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention lifted the recommendation to pause use of the Johnson & Johnson shots, saying the benefits outweigh the risks. Their decision followed a vote by a federal vaccine advisory committee that recommended restarting use of J&J's COVID-19 one-shot vaccine in the United States. J&J has agreed with the FDA to add language to the vaccine's label, warning about the clot risk. The committee met after authorities had identified a total of 15 cases of women experiencing blood clots combined with low blood platelet counts after receiving the J&J vaccine, according to a presentation by a CDC official during yesterday's meeting. 3 of the women have died. The global death toll for COVID-19 surpassed 3 million, according to data compiled by Johns Hopkins University. Infections are out of control in India as that country is dealing with a double-mutant variant. Overwhelmed hospitals begged for oxygen supplies as the country's coronavirus infections soared again overnight in what they termed as a tsunami of disease, setting a new world record for cases for the 3rd consecutive day. India is the world's 2nd most populous country with nearly 1.4 billion people. On Monday, it had said it would soon expand its vaccination program from people aged 45 to include all adults, which are about some 900 million people. Some 2.7 million vaccine doses are given daily, but that's still less than 10% of its population who've gotten their first shot. On Friday, India confirmed 16 million cases of infection, the 2nd highest after the United States, and recorded 2,263 deaths in the past 24 hours for a total of 186,920,000. Just in from Baghdad, at least 19 people died in a hospital fire tonight after oxygen tanks exploded, health officials at the hospital told CNN. Officials are still trying to figure out how many were wounded in the explosion at Ibn al-Khatib Hospital, but they say there are many. On Friday, Japan declared COVID-19 state of emergency in Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto, Hyogo prefectures. It's their 3rd lockdown. It begins Sunday, tomorrow, and will run until May 11. Here's a report by the Bloomberg News in Tokyo.
Tokyo is back in a state of emergency. We've been seeing a rise in COVID cases here less than 100 days before the start of the delayed Olympics. The city already had a quasi-state of emergency in place called Maenboshi, but the number of infections haven't really gone down. Tokyo Governor Yuriko Koike has said infections are spreading, and that's putting the medical system under pressure again. This is the third state of emergency for the city, and let me point out that this covers the string of Japanese public holidays known as Golden Week. It's usually one of the busiest travel seasons, so officials are hoping to keep more people home this year. What's different this time around is the toughest restrictions we've ever seen. The government is asking eateries serving alcohol and big establishments like department stores to close completely, not just shorten their hours. As for the Olympics, Prime Minister Suga has said it will have no impact on the Games. There's no law technically that prohibits the Olympics from taking place under a state of emergency, but it will probably impact the number of domestic spectators allowed. We know fans from overseas have already been banned from attending. I also want to touch on what's happening with the vaccination drive here. It's been slow. Japan only started vaccinating the general public for those over 65 years old in April. So far, less than 3% of the population has been vaccinated. And the government's vaccine czar, Taro Kono, said Japan's vaccination program will finish by February of 2022. For now, Japan hopes another state of emergency will help flatten the curve and hopefully carry on with the Tokyo Olympics. Kurumi Mori, Bloomberg News, Tokyo.
Everybody on the planet needs it. Many are desperate for it, said Lev Kubiak, Pfizer's world head of security. We have a very limited supply, a supply that will increase as we ramp up and other companies enter the vaccine space. In the interim, there is a perfect opportunity for criminals, end quote. For months, agents from the National Intellectual Property Rights Coordination Center, an investigative arm of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, have been investigating fraud related to the COVID-19 pandemic globally, recovering $48 million worth of phony masks, personal protection equipment, and other products. Last fall, investigators shifted their focus to include COVID-19 vaccines that were nearing potential clearance by regulators, beginning with online scams. They have removed 30 websites and seized 74 web domains, according to the officials. So far, no counterfeit vaccines have been discovered in the United States, according to the Department of Health and Services. Thus far, the first confirmed instances of counterfeit versions of the COVID-19 vaccine developed by Pfizer were identified by the drug maker in Mexico and Poland. About 80 people at a clinic in Mexico received a fake vaccine going for about $1,000 a dose, though they don't appear to have been physically harmed. The vials found in beach-style beer coolers had different lot numbers than those sent to the state and a wrong expiration date, Health Secretary of Nuevo Leon state said. In Poland, authorities there said no one there had received the counterfeit vaccine, which was seized at a man's apartment. The U.S., Mexico, and other countries have seized and taken down dozens of websites fraudulently claiming to sell shots or an affiliation with vaccine makers such as Moderna and Pfizer, according to government officials and records. The fake company lookalike websites appear to be seeking consumers' personal information to be used in identity fraud schemes, government and industry officials say. Fake shots for the pandemic can be easy to distinguish from real ones, experts say, because legitimate ones can only be found for now sold to governments, making any shots for sale on the internet counterfeit and potentially harmful. Police in China and South Africa last month seized thousands of doses of counterfeit COVID-19 vaccines in warehouses and manufacturing plants, arresting dozens of people, according to International Police Agency Interpol. Mexico also is investigating a shipment of some 6,000 doses of purported Sputnik vaccine from Russia, which were seized from a private plane headed to Honduras in March. Back in this country, more than a quarter of the U.S. population have now been vaccinated against COVID-19, and nearly 40% of people have received at least one shot, but the average number of newly reported cases each day remains high. Meanwhile, the demand for vaccine is waning. The latest numbers: 218,947,643 vaccine doses have been given so far in the United States. 67,257 new U.S. cases were recorded yesterday. 943 deaths in the United States were recorded yesterday. Total U.S. deaths are 570,346. And total confirmed cases in the U.S. are 31,930,188. And worldwide, confirmed cases are 144,800,467, with 3,073,851 deaths. Today was Armenian Genocide Memorial Day. For those of you that might not know what this is, I'm going to include, for some background, a report filed by CNN's Ottawa Damon, filed from Istanbul, Turkey, this evening.
For decades, Armenians have lobbied and pleaded to have the mass killings of their ancestors recognized as genocide. The exact number of Armenians who lost their lives more than a century ago is in dispute, but experts put the numbers between 600,000 and 1.5 million. The campaign against Armenians in Ottoman lands included forced migrations, massacres, and starvation. For many Armenians, recognizing the brutality endured by their ancestors is a crucial step in righting a historic wrong. But modern-day Turkey, that rose from the ashes of the Ottoman Empire, has long maintained the killings were not systematic, were smaller in number, and do not meet the legal definition of genocide. In fact, the word genocide and the legal framework around it only entered the mainstream after World War II. The word was coined by a Polish lawyer to describe the Nazis' systematic attempt to eradicate Jews in Europe, what we now call the Holocaust. Turkey has softened its position over the years, with Turkish leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan in 2014 issuing a first-ever statement, calling the events of 1915 a shared pain, and offering condolences to the descendants of the killed. Turkey still argues the events need to be put in historical context, that hundreds of thousands of people from other groups also lost their lives in rampant killings, some of which were carried out by Armenians. The historical debate has long been overshadowed by politics in recognition of the Armenian genocide. For years, Turkey's allies in the West had sidestepped the label of genocide in order to keep Ankara in the fold. As Turkey's ties with the West became rockier than ever, a slew of genocide recognition bills have been passed in European capitals. Turkey's rivals, like Russia and Syria, also jumped in to recognize the genocide label. One of the remaining holdouts has been the United States. But with U.S.-Turkish relations strained to new lows over the last 2 years, momentum has been building in Washington to recognize the events as a genocide. During his term, President Obama shied away from using the term genocide, choosing to call it Medyegun, an Armenian term meaning the Great Calamity. In 2019, both the Senate and House passed a resolution to recognize the Armenian genocide. But President Trump refused to call the events a genocide. And now President Biden has done it. The Armenian leadership recognizing this as being...
Today, President Joe Biden made that declaration, which he pledged during his campaign a year ago to formally recognize that atrocities committed against the Armenian people by the Ottoman Empire, now modern-day Turkey, more than a century ago, were genocide. Turkey rejected the acknowledgement. Quote, We reject and denounce in the strongest terms the statement of the President of the United States regarding the events of 1915 made under the pressure of radical Armenian circles and anti-Turkey groups, end quote, the Turkish Foreign Ministry said in a statement. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu tweeted that, quote, words cannot change history or rewrite it, end quote, and Turkey, quote, completely rejected, end quote, Biden's statement. In a tweet today, Turkey's foreign minister said, quote, lies do not just twist history, they also take innocent lives. The ministry posted the names of 31 Turkish diplomats and their relatives killed by Armenian militant groups in the 1970s and 1980s. Turkey says both Armenians and Turks were killed during World War I. For decades, past U.S. presidents have acknowledged Remembrance Day to mark the events of 1915 to 1923, but have avoided using the term genocide to sidestep alienating Turkey. President Biden, in his first telephone call since assuming office 3 months ago, he held a conference with Turkey's president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and informed him of his plan to issue the statement. The two leaders plan to meet at the NATO summit in Brussels in June. Meanwhile, the U.S. Embassy and consulates in Turkey issued a demonstration alert and announced their offices would be closed for routine services on Monday and Tuesday as a precautionary measure. They cautioned Americans to avoid areas around U.S. government buildings and exercise caution in locations where foreigners gather. After 3 weeks of testimony, which ended last Thursday in the murder trial of Derek Chauvin, the jury returned after 10.5 hours of deliberation over 2 days on Tuesday and convicted former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin on all charges in the death of George Floyd. Chauvin, who is 45, faces up to 40 years in prison for second-degree murder, up to 25 years for third-degree murder, and up to 10 years for second-degree manslaughter. He's only the 7th police officer convicted of thousands killed. The Rodney King case nearly 3 decades ago, when 4 Los Angeles officers were acquitted of beating King, a black motorist. The remaining officers, Lane, Thao, and Kueng, charged in the deaths of George Floyd, will be tried together on August 23. Rodney Floyd, the brother of George Floyd, said this is for everyone who has been held down and pinned down. President Biden called the Floyd family from the Oval Office, and Floyd had died in May 2020 after Chauvin placed his knee on Floyd's neck while he pleaded, "I can't breathe," for over 9 minutes. Chauvin was handcuffed in the courtroom and taken into custody by the sheriff's office, and he'll be sentenced in about 8 weeks. Crowds outside the Minneapolis courtroom and at the location where George Floyd was killed shouted justice and Black Lives Matter following a guilty verdict. Attorney Ben Crump and George Floyd's family released a statement following the conviction of Derek Chauvin saying, quote, "Today's verdict goes far beyond the city and has significant implications for the country and even the world," end quote. The Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation released a statement in reaction to the guilty verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial. Quote, "We hope this guilty verdict begins to show that white supremacy will not win. White supremacy has no place in democracy, especially one that is supposed to guarantee us our freedom to live," end quote. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People said that while justice landed Derek Chauvin in jail, the fight for police accountability and respect for Black lives is far from over. George Floyd Justice in Policing Act that passed the U.S. House has stalled in the Senate. President Biden spoke on Tuesday from the White House hours after the verdict, alongside Vice President Kamala Harris, with the pair saying the country's work is far from finished with the verdict. We can't stop here, Biden declared. Biden and Harris called on Congress to act swiftly to address policing reform, including by approving a bill named for Floyd, who died with his neck under Chauvin's knee last May. Beyond that, the president said the entire country must confront hatred to change hearts and minds, as well as laws and policies. Arizona Governor Doug Ducey declared a state of emergency at the southwest border of his state and said the state would deploy 250 National Guard troops to help local law enforcement. The U.S. Border Patrol is overwhelmed, he said. Local law enforcement and mayors are calling out for help. The Republican said on Tuesday in a recorded statement, "Citizens in our border communities are concerned for their safety, and nonprofits left to pick up the pieces of broken federal policies are strained." End quote. Arizona is the first state to declare an emergency related to this year's rapid increase in arrests of people crossing the border illegally. Border Patrol agents made about 168,000 arrests at the border in March, compared with about 71,000 in December. Last month, Texas deployed 500 National Guard troops to increase law enforcement at the border, but the governor didn't declare a state of emergency. On Thursday, April 22, we marked Earth Day. What are you recycling? A cleaner world starts with us. Most recyclables are still ending up in a landfill. This week, we also marked the 40th anniversary of National Crime Victims' Rights Week, for those who have suffered abuse or just simply watch the news. Many of you in the therapy world know the expression, hurt people hurt people. Did you know it is estimated 60% of prison inmates are living with traumatic brain injuries? TBIs can completely change a person overnight, but this is not often the case. It could be months or years before you realize your loved one is more moody, irritable, and forgetful since their car accident or slip and fall. Brain injuries put everyone at risk for many problems. In 2014, there were over 2.8 million TBI-related ER visits, including 37,000 of them affecting kids, according to the CDC. With mental illness statistics rising, we have to take these bumps and blows to the head more seriously. PTSD is another huge epidemic impacting our society. For abuse victims, it's imperative to find hope and safe options for resolution. In our Overcome Anxiety, Depression, Trauma, and Grief course, Dr. Amen and Tina discuss how we can heal from painful experiences holistically by using brain-based protocols. You can increase your gray matter volume, compassion, and empathy using mindfulness practices. It is a common side effect for those who meditate regularly to feel better more often with less bias and anger toward others. Tana's loving kindness meditation is wonderful. A link in the show notes is included for you to listen to these meditations. Meanwhile, Queen Elizabeth II marked her 95th birthday on Wednesday, and in incoming months will celebrate marking her 40 years on the throne. The Queen's reign began with the death of her father, King George VI, on February 6, 1952. She was formally crowned on June 2, 1953. For those speculating whether she will step down, her oath was, "I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong." No, she won't be stepping down. She has no intention of emulating Queen Victoria, however, who retreated from public life when her husband, Prince Albert, died unexpectedly at the age of 42. although Prince Charles has taken on an increasing number of public engagements and been named the Queen's designated successor as head of the Commonwealth, a voluntary association of 54 nations with links to the British Empire. Questions about the end of the Queen's reign will fuel the debate over the long-term future of the monarchy, seen as either a symbol of national unity or as an obsolete vestige of the nation's feudal history. Meanwhile, the BBC received more than 100,000 complaints about its decision to preempt popular TV programs for round-the-clock coverage of Prince Philip's death, the most it has ever received about a single programming decision. Philip's death serves as a reminder that a lot of people don't think much about the monarchy. This week, we lost former Vice President Walter Mondale, 93, who died on Monday at his home in Minneapolis, as the city awaited a verdict in a murder trial that has forced the nation to again wrestle with structural racism. And we lost Hester Ford, the oldest living American. In Charlotte, North Carolina, a woman who grew up picking cotton, got married at 14, and went on to become the oldest living American with more than 120 great-grandchildren, has died peacefully in her home, according to her family. Hester Ford was either 115 or 116 years old, depending on which census report was accurate. Either way, she was the oldest living American when she died last Saturday in Charlotte, according to the Gerontology Research Group, which tracks supercentenarians. They listed her age as 115 years and 245 days. Ford was born on a farm in Lancaster County, South Carolina, in 1905. She married John Ford at age 14 and gave birth to the first of her 12 children at age 15. The couple moved to Charlotte, where she remained for the rest of her life. Her husband died in 1963 at age 57, 3 years after the couple moved to Charlotte. Hester Ford then lived in the home on her own without assistance until the age of 108, when she bruised ribs in a bathtub fall and her family members insisted on moving in to help. She lived in the home with family until her death. Her 12 children have given her 68 grandchildren, 128 great-grandchildren, and at least 120 great-great-grandchildren. In her final years, her family said her routine involved a breakfast that always included half a banana, a trip outside for fresh air, weather permitting, and sitting in her recliner looking at family albums, doing puzzles, and listening to gospel music. When asked what the secret to her longevity was, she said, "I just live right, all I know." Next, a story about former President George W. Bush, 74, who released a book this week entitled Out of Many, One, Portraits of America's Immigrants. On Tuesday, the former president was in New York to preside over a naturalization ceremony and appeared on NBC's Today Show. The former president did not talk about the former President Donald Trump, who curbed immigration during his tenure and sought to build a, quote, big beautiful wall at the southwest border with Mexico to keep out migrants. Bush said, "It's not beautiful when we condemn, call people names, and scare people about immigration." Included in the book are 43 paintings and narratives that are on exhibit at the Bush Center in Dallas through January 2022. George W. didn't grow up drawing as a child. He only began painting 8 years ago after becoming inspired by Winston Churchill's book, Painting as a Pastime. On Friday, an interview appeared in the Wall Street Journal along with his wife Laura at their ranch in Crawford, Texas, where his art studio is some 2 hours from Dallas, where they spend most of their time. President George W. Bush is the oldest of 6 children of George and Barbara Bush. He grew up in Midland, Texas, where the family lived in a small 1-story gray-green house with a red roof on the outskirts of town. Bush Sr., who also was president, co-founded an oil drilling company. When George W. was 13, in 1959, his father became CEO of an offshore drilling company, and the family moved to Houston, where they had a bigger house and needed help with the kids. That's when Paola Rendon arrived. She's the second person featured in the book. Paola was his first exposure to someone who had come to America from Mexico with nothing and worked hard to provide for her family. And that's why I chose to paint her for Out of Many, One, said the president. The book includes other exceptional immigrants from countries such as Iraq, Iran, Turkey, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Saigon, North Korea, Cambodia, the Sudan, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Chile, Cuba, San Salvador, and Venezuela, among others. When the book came out, I got it on Audible, and I could not stop listening to it. What I loved about it is that after the president spoke, then he had the people in their own voice tell their own story. And if you get the version in Audible, you'll get to see that as well. You will get a PDF that of about 200 pages that includes other people, and it has the book. So you get both an audio version and a written one that you can print out if you want to, or you can just scroll through it. Now, of the 43 people, one of my favorites is the story of Hamdi Ulukaya. He's the founder of the thick Greek yogurt brand called Chobani, which is the Turkish word for shepherd. His story is one of the many contributions that immigrants have made America better, and the spirit that they bring. And one of the nice things about Chobani, its founder, is that he hired local workers and refugees. So he's giving back. There are so many amazing stories that I could not include everyone in here, but because everyone probably knows the yogurt and probably sees it in the grocery store, I think that the story deserves, sharing with the audience, because I've only seen a few reports about him, and immigrants don't get enough recognition, and even though there are many in this country, um, you know, when you recognize someone like a Madeleine Albright or Henry Kissinger, those are well known household names and everybody knows who they are. But in this book, these are names that we don't know, that we've never heard of. These are people, even though they've contributed to our country, you might not hear about them. And here they are in a book by a president who normally presidents don't get political after they get out of office, but he just felt compelled that he needed to put out this book to elevate the dialogue, since the last president, kind of was not very kind, including to Arabs and Muslims, and Mexicans especially. So what I loved about this book is it made me feel proud to be an American. As the daughter of immigrants, first generation, when I read this story, I couldn't believe it. It's like, oh my God, a president who cares about immigrants. It made me feel so proud to be an American and that I just lived in the best country in the world. And it made me have hope that we could turn around, that this country could really be that American dream for everybody that comes here for it. We have people here that have made a life for themselves, a better life, that still believe in that American dream. Here's Hamdi Ulukaya in his own words.
My name is Hamdi Ulukaya. To me, the American dream means hope. I grew up in Turkey, in the mountains with shepherds. My father was a nomad, just like his father before him. But I wanted something more. I wanted to see what was beyond the mountains. So I came to America, to New York City. At first, I was overwhelmed. The skyscrapers, the traffic, the noise. I'd always heard America was the land of opportunity. But I didn't know whether there was a place here for me. Then, one day, I found my place. It was an 85-year-old yogurt factory in upstate New York that was weeks away from closing forever. And in that place, I found my people. Men and women who had worked in that factory for decades, who had followed in the footsteps of their parents and grandparents, who were now watching their history, their future, to be sold and shuttered. I couldn't let that happen. So I took out a loan. Everyone I know begged me not to, and I bought the factory and hired as many people as I could. Then we started making yogurt. We called our company Chobani, means shepherd in Turkish. America is a land of hope. Americans believe in the future. They are willing to do work for it. They're willing to open their hearts and their homes to a nomad son from Turkey, to build something they can be proud of, something they can hand down to their children, something that matters. Chobani's story, my story, is a story of hope. It's a story that could only happen in America. We must all do our part to keep American magic alive forever so everyone can reach to their dreams.
And there are so many more. There's Kim Mitchell. She doesn't even know her real name. In May 1972, Kim's birth mother was killed when the Viet Cong attacked their village. Later that day, an older man found the 6-month-old clutching her dead mother. He placed her in his straw hat and carried her until he could hand her off to a South Vietnamese Marine named Bao Tran. Bao carried her 37 miles to an orphanage in Da Nang. One day, an American Air Force sergeant named James Mitchell came by the orphanage on a regular run to deliver clothing and food. He instantly fell in love with the baby when nuns placed her in his arms. He named her Kim and adopted her and flew her to the United States. She grew up on a farm in Wisconsin and went on to the Air Force Academy. But then she decided to attend the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis and went on to serve our country for 17 years as a naval surface warfare officer. Finally, the 93rd Oscars ceremony will take place tomorrow evening in Los Angeles. The Academy of Motion Pictures and Science plans to honor filmmaking from the past year in an in-person but safely distanced event. Even though movie theaters were closed, there was a lot of online viewing. In tomorrow's Heart and Home podcast, I will cover that big question. How long does the vaccine last? We're all wondering after hearing booster shots will be required because this virus and its many variants are going to be with us for a long time. For the Heart and Home podcast, I'm Sabah Fakhoury. I'll talk to you tomorrow.